this is the last presentation for today, and it'll be given by a familiar face to me, Joanne Chu from the University of Alberta. Her presentation is titled "The Effect of Dietary Energy Level and Feed Restriction on Egg Production in Laying Hens to 30 weeks of age."
Thank you, Danu, for the introduction. Good afternoon, everyone, and thank you for attending this presentation. I assume you all can see my slides fine. Now, to bring a hen into lay, photostimulation is required. However, it is not the only trigger. Body composition also plays a role, and it can be affected by feed composition, such as diet energy level, as well as feed intake. And not just quantity, but the timing of feed intake also plays a role for fat to lean ratio. Now, the stimulation from pullet to hen at the onset of lay is not fully understood, especially with how body condition as affected by feed composition and intake may play a role. And that's exactly what this research aims to answer. The objective of the study was to examine the effect of feed composition through dietary energy level and feed intake through feed restriction on body composition and egg production. And since high energy diets and non-restricted feeding will result in a greater conversion of energy to storage as fat, it is hypothesized that pullets fed a high energy or non-restricted diet will have a greater body weight, body fat, and egg production than those on a low energy or restricted diet. In this experiment, 2 simultaneous trials were conducted using a conventional feeding system, hereby abbreviated as CON, C-O-N, and a precision feeding system, PFS. In both systems, Lohmann brown light pullets were randomly assigned to floor pens. Conventional birds were fed as a group daily, while precision-fed birds had access to multi-feeder stations throughout the day, pending their body weight, and feed is allocated individually. The conventional trial had 2 feed restriction levels, non-restricted and restricted, and 3 diet levels of low, standard, or high dietary metabolizable energy, ME, at 2,600, 2,800, or 3,000 kilocalories per kilogram, respectively. The precision feeding experiment had the same design with 1 added diet level, choice, where birds could choose from the 3 diets. The different diet levels were until 20 weeks of age, and all the birds were placed on the same standard layer diet after that. The birds were reared from 0 to 30 weeks of age and photostimulated at 18. Every 4 weeks from 10 to 30 weeks, 8 conventional birds per treatment were dissected and their fat pad weighed. During the onset of lay, the birds were also monitored for their body weight and age at first egg, and egg production was recorded. Data from both systems were analyzed as a completely randomized design. The effect of feed restriction, diet composition, and their interactions were analyzed. Means were declared different when the p-value was less than 0.05. Here are the results. Beginning with the body weight at first egg for the birds in the precision feeding system, dietary energy levels did not affect body weight at first egg, and non-restricted fed birds had a greater body weight. However, when it came to the age at first egg, neither diet level nor feed restriction had an effect on age. Whereas in the conventionally fed birds, while there was no effect of diet on the age at first egg, birds on the restricted diet came into lay approximately 2 weeks after the non-restricted fed birds. And since the onset of lay is associated with body fat, dissected fat pad reflect the previous data as well, in that birds on the non-restricted diet, the solid lines, had greater relative body fat than the restricted birds, which are the dashed lines. Here is an overall picture of egg production. Once again, it is shown that non-restricted birds came into lay earlier than the restricted birds. However, in the precision-fed birds, while the difference is still there, it is not as pronounced. And this may be due to differences in feeding systems, since conventional birds were fed once a day, while the precision-fed birds could have multiple meals throughout the day, affecting their fat to lean ratio. This graph also shows us that at 21 weeks, non-restricted birds fed the high energy diet had a greater egg production than restricted birds fed the low energy diet. So what does all of this tell us? The results from this study suggest that non-restricted fed birds had a greater body weight at first egg, and in the conventional system came into lay before the restricted birds. In the precision feeding system, non-restricted birds fed the high energy diet had greater egg production. And so that answers our question on how feed composition and intake can affect a pullet's body condition for onset of lay. But we still need to go deeper. How does having a larger body composition trigger stimulation? What are the related metabolic and physiological signaling molecules, and how do they interact with each other? The results reported here is part of a much larger and longer study, and that's where we would continue to answer our question. So I encourage you to stay tuned for when those results come out. And with that, thank you for your time and attention. Thank you to the funders as well. Happy to answer any questions that you have.
All right, that was a quick one. We do have a question in the Q&A, and it says, what was the level of feed restriction? And I'm not sure if you want to talk about percentage-wise or grams per hen per day.
Thank you for the question, Dr. Bede-Karatz. What was the level of feed restriction? The birds fed restricted were on the lower end of the target body weight as set by the recommended guide. So in this case, we had low and brown light pullets. So we followed the target body weight as set out in the guide, and we used the lower end of the in the low and brown light, there was a range for target body weight, a low end and a high end, and we used the low end for feed restriction.
Perfect. And there's another question here from Vicky Sicker. Says, hi, Joanne, great presentation. Can you remind me why you are feed restricting egg layers? What is the purpose?
Great question. Why are we feed restricting egg layers? We are curious to see whether feed restriction, as opposed to ad libitum birds, how it has to do with energy and nutrient partitioning. And so when a bird is limited with the amount of feed that she receives on a daily basis, how does she allocate that feed towards her entire body? Does it go towards growth? Does it go towards maintenance? Does it go towards egg production? And so with feed restriction, we can really identify what and pinpoint what part of energy partitioning she's at.
Right on. And there is another question in there. It says, did the precision fed birds eat more when ad lib fed compared to restricted?
Great question. Thank you, Dr. Bede-Karatz. The precision feed birds, oh, sorry, 1 second. I forgot the question.
Oh, I'm sorry. I already canned it. Did the precision fed birds eat more when ad lib compared to feed restricted?
Okay. The precision fed birds, that is a good question about feed intake. We are still in the process of analyzing that data. We collected a lot of data, well, you would know. And the precision fed birds were allocated, well, all the birds that were precision fed were allocated a time to eat when they enter the station, the precision feeding stations. And I haven't fully looked at that data yet, but they would have eaten less because they were restricted by their body weight. So the way the precision feeding system works is if a bird reaches that target body weight, it will not be allowed to proceed to the feeder. As opposed to an ad lib bird, she's allowed to proceed and eat as much as she wants. So the restricted bird would have less feed intake just because she's limited by her current body weight.
Thanks, Joanne. And I think the last question is, in a context where production period will be extended to 18 months, how do you see the restricted fed layers performances versus precision
fed? Very good question. Thank you. What a great suggestion for extending it to 18 months. And that's exactly what we're doing with our trial. So I'm only reporting data up to 30 weeks. This experiment goes up to 89 weeks. And so, you know, in laying hens, for egg production, is it a sprint? Is it a marathon? We want to be able to see how it goes long term. And so stay tuned for when those results come out. How do I think about the restricted hens performance? That is the question that I am trying to answer. But yeah, feel free to throw in your hypotheses as well.
Next year, right, Joanne?
yeah, next year. Tune in next year, and then I'll give you the results.
Right on. Well, there's no more questions, so thank you for your presentation, Joanne.